In the previous video, part 14a, I looked at making a decision to make a missed approach and make a go-around at our destination airport. I showed basically a way of achieving this in a part manual operation of the system to overfly the airport, make a turn and come back to intercept the original ILS. And I stated that I thought that there should be a more technical and more automatic way of doing this. It would appear that because most of my videos have been involved in flying from airports within the UK, that has been the issue, because I have VFR photographic scenery for the entire United Kingdom. I also have UK airports on my system, and I have a number of UK airports X-Screen on my system. And I have a feeling that for whatever reason that scenery is affecting the onboard MCDU FMC programming. So on this particular video, what I have done is to set up a flight from Zurich in Switzerland, LSZH, to Geneva in Switzerland, LSGG, and we will be overflying the wonderful scenery of Switzerland X for FSX. However, although I'm using a scenery add-on package here, the MCDU FMC does seem to create a missed approach and go-around route. And so we're going to look at that as we fly over this lovely scenery with the Swiss Alps on the left-hand side of the aircraft, and we shall be cruising at an altitude of 20,000 feet. The route that I have entered into the MCDU is LSZH Zurich, departure runway 16, then VOR waypoints WIL, FRI and SPR, with an arrival at LSGG Geneva on runway 23, and the cruising altitude has been set to 20,000 feet. The flight is around 125 miles, and that journey will give us sufficient time to enjoy some of the beautiful Swiss scenery and also have time to look at what is happening within the MCDU and the arrangements for a missed approach and go-around. At this point, we have just reached 20,000 feet at cruise altitude. So, we are cruising along at 20,000 feet at 270 knots. We are heading to our first waypoint, WIL, and our top descent point is ahead of us. Now, the first thing I want to look at is the FMC, which has our route. You can see here, top of descent, which is just ahead of us, FRI, SPR, and then our arrival at LSGG. I have switched the map display to plan, and I have the MCDU in flight plan as well. And if I use the up and down arrows now, I can scroll through my plan on this display. So I'm going to scroll through, and you will see the plan beginning to move. Here is LSGG. Here is LSGG. But if I continue to scroll, you will see that I have now a new route past the airport. Here is LSGG. I now have a route past the airport with a turn and back. Now I have paused the flight for a minute or two to look at this in a little more detail. Here is the waypoint SPR. The MCDU has created a further waypoint called Petal, and then my landing at LSGG on runway 23. But then ahead of the runway in blue is an exit route to a waypoint called GVA95 with a left-hand turn coming back close to Petal and back to SPR. Now SPR is on my ILS intercept route, and so what the MCDU has done is to create a potential route for me to find my way back to my ILS approach. Now I want to look at a little more detail at the scratch pad of the MCDU FMC. In green you can see my intended route from the deceleration point to SPR to a calculated waypoint ISW18, a further one at Petal, and then at LSGG runway 23. But if I use the scroll arrows and I continue to scroll, in blue you can now see GVA95 and SPR. So this is a potentially usable route after I have passed the airport of my intended landing. Now the fact that these entries are in blue is telling me that they are not at the moment active waypoints. They will only become active if and when I decide to make a go-around. So let's go back to the route that I am following. Here is my top of descent, at which point I will be at flight level 200, 20,000 feet. At FRI, I will still be at 20,000 feet. But by the time I reach SPR, I need to be down to flight level 075, 7,500 feet. So when I reach my top of descent, the next thing I am going to do is to make my intended altitude of 7,500 feet active. Okay, let's do a little bit of forward planning. I'm 20,000 feet here. This is my top of descent. When I reach top of descent, I need to make an altitude change to 7,500 feet. I'm going to dial in 7,500 feet into the altitude setting, but I am only dialing it in. I am not pressing or pulling the knob. At this particular point, it is not active. It is just an intended altitude of 7,500 feet. Just before or at this point of descent, I will left click this button for this altitude to become active, and the MCDU FMC will then make the aircraft begin its descent. So whilst we're cruising to our top of descent point, let's just enjoy a little bit of this wonderful scenery of the Swiss Alps. Okay, I'm now nearing my top of descent, and I am now going to left click 7,500 feet intended altitude, and at the moment I do that, you will hear the engines throttle back and we will begin a descent. I am now descending through 19,800. Now it is worth monitoring the MCDU. You noticed that before, when I got to SPR, it had an intended altitude of 7,500. That is altered slightly now to 7,300. And by the time I reach Petal, I need to be at 4,670. So I'm going to amend my descent altitude to 7,300 at the moment. And when I reach SPR, I am going to dial in 4,670, as that is my next required altitude. Now I cannot dial in 670, so I'm going to put in 4,700. I'm going to amend this to 7,300. Left click it to ensure that it is under the control of the MCDU. I am now approaching the eastern end of Lake Geneva. Geneva is in this area almost ahead of me. Looking at my aim instrument, I have just passed the waypoint FRI. The next waypoint is SPR. That is where I need to be at 7,300 feet. Presently descending 16,200. Throttle idle, in a descent, altitude being followed, navigation being held by the MCDU. Descending through 12,200 at the moment. SPR, where I should be at 7,300. A slight left turn to the two new waypoints, TSU 18 and Petal. And then runway 23 will be directly ahead of me. So when I reach SPR, I can switch to ILS mode in order to pick up the ILS for my intended run. If we look at the scale of this map at the moment, each of these rings here is 10 miles, 10 miles, 20 miles, 30 miles. So by the time I reach SPR, my intended runway will be approximately 20 miles in front of me. So I have 20 miles to prepare myself for final touchdown. I'm now overflying the northern shores of Lake Geneva. Okay, I am now approaching SPR, at which point I should be at 7,300, and I am just passing 7,600, so it looks as though I'm going to be right on target. Now at petal, I need to be at 4,700. I need to put this into the autopilot now. 4,700 being entered. I am now at SPR. I need to be at 4,700 at petal. Left click. Make a further descent. Now I have paused the flight for a few minutes whilst we look at this particular final routing. Here is SPR, and I have just dialed in my next altitude heading setting of 4,700, which I should reach at petal. I should now be able to pick up the ILS for runway 23, which I will do in a moment. As I reach the approach of the runway, I will make a missed approach. So I will put the throttle levers fully forward to the toga position, and the aircraft will climb out. But as I am in my final ILS approach, I need to set an altitude for these headings and waypoints here, PAS and GVA 95. Now if I look down at the scratch pad, here is my landing runway, ILS runway 23, which has an altitude of 1,365 feet. But as I go on as a missed approach, I need to climb out to 1,911 feet by GVA 95 and 7,000 feet by the time I reach SPR. Now once I have intercepted the ILS approach and my glide slope, and both the glide slope and the localizer are active, I can dial in my new intended climb out altitude, which is going to be 7,000 feet. I will not make that active until I have pushed the throttles forward and I am in the climb out. So the next section is going to be as normal. Intercept the ILS and glide slope, follow it to the runway, increasing flaps and reducing speed and putting gear out as necessary. When I have done that, I will stop the video once again, just prior to making my decision to call a missed approach. So I am now going to select LS, knob to LS. Here is my localizer, select localizer. Here is my glide slope, which is fully active. Select approach. The system will now follow both the localizer and the glide slope to the ground. Flaps 1. Speed decreasing. ILS is confirmed here, frequency of 109.80 and the course heading is 225. We'll now make a slow descent over Lake Geneva. Passing 6,100 feet.
Roger.
5,900 feet.
Center 5379er with you.
Geneva Airport will be in this area. Now, this altitude is no longer being used because the system has captured both the localizer and the glide slope. I'm now going to dial in my missed approach altitude to 7,000 feet. That's all I'm doing is dialing it in. Nothing else is happening. I am still making the descent to Geneva Airport. I'm now doing 170 knots, flaps 2. Speed descending.
Selena heading 155, contact near departure.
Just passing 4,000 feet. Geneva Airport now directly ahead, centered of the localizer, centered among the glide slope. Flaps 3.
2,500.
2,500 feet above the runway. Now passing through 3,000 feet, I'm going to take the aircraft down to approximately 500 feet above the runway, and then I will make my go-around decision. Things will happen quite quickly. So at that point that I decide to make a go around, I'm going to retract the gear, retract the flaps as I make my climb out, and we will look at it in more detail as we actually undertake the procedure. Okay, I'm now passing through 2,400 feet. I have full flaps set. I have gear down, and I should make a normal landing. So I am all set, but for whatever reason I decide to make a go around, or air traffic control tells me to make a go around. I'm approximately 600 feet above the runway now, and I'm going to decide to make my go around.
500.
Throttles fully forward to the total position.
400.
Aircraft begins to climb. Retract gear, retract flaps 1 notch. Watch my speed increasing. Reduce flaps. Now I'm going to pause it again. So I am now in a nose up, climb out position, and I am still in line with the runway. So I have put it now into a missed approach go around situation. Gear has been retracted, flaps are in the process of being retracted as my speed increases. Now in reality, once you decide to make a go around, things happen very quickly. That's why I have paused the video. Note now that the areas on the MCDU display which were blue have now become green, because they are now my active new route. But between my original route and my new route, I've got a flight plan discontinuity which I have to get rid of. So it is now going to take me back to ISW 18 and Petal, and back to LSGG runway 23. So the first thing I need to do is to clear this discontinuity. I have to do that with the aircraft flying. Clear, enter clear into the discontinuity. Now I am passing my runway. I am now heading for my new route, and I'm passing through 4,300 feet. I need to make this new altitude of 7,000 feet active. I do apologise, there was so much going on there. I forgot that as I was climbing out I needed to pull the throttle levers back to the CLB position, which I've done. It is now holding speed. So it's now holding its speed at about 180. My flaps are now clean. I'm coming to the end of this new route. It should make a left turn very shortly. Look at this routing here now. We should very shortly be beginning to make a left turn, and I'm levelling out now at 7,000 feet. There is the indicator showing I am making a left turn. So the aircraft has now climbed to its new required altitude of 7,000 and is turning left to follow its new calculated route back to the original waypoint. I can now make certain that that is the case. There is my new routing. Aircraft will attempt to follow this new route. SPR is 28 miles from my present position. So I am now heading back towards the airport at 7,000 feet. I'm now passing parallel to the airport at 7,000 feet. My approach was here, over the lake, down to the runway, make a go around, climb out, turn around, and back. So I'm now heading back to SPR. Now I've altered my range here to 40 miles, and you can see that the system has calculated a new route with a turn at the top to come back to the waypoint of Petto, intercept the ILS and make my landing once again. But when I was at SPR and Petto, if you remember, I was at a much lower altitude, 4,700 feet. So I'm going to have to put that new altitude back into the autopilot and make my descent for my final approach. So I'm now heading back to SPR, still at 7,000 feet, which I need to be at until I reach SPR, and then I need to enter the new altitude of 4,700 and make a second attempt at my ILS landing. Now, although a lot of this is automated, as a pilot you do have to monitor that everything is doing what it is supposed to be doing, and you have to monitor your airspeed and flaps settings. Now 11 miles from SPR. Once again I'm going to dial in 4,700. I'm not going to do anything else but dial it in. All I now need to do at the correct point is to left click that button.
Proceed on course. Climb and maintain flight level 330. Air France code 166.
I'm now 3.7 miles from SPR. We'll shortly be making an automatic turn to that waypoint.
136.45.
Still at 7,000 feet at this point. Aircraft will very shortly begin its final turn back to SPR, and I will then be ready to intercept the ILS. It's just turning now. I'm now approaching SPR. I'm going to left click my next altitude 4,700 feet, and the aircraft will descend.
Contact approach 125.5.
I don't have a yellow dot here for some reason, though the aircraft is responding to the altitude settings. Flaps 1. I now need to head for Petal and the ILS. So I'm now going to switch LS, which is already on, and rotate my knob to the LS position. Here is my localizer. Select localizer on. Aircraft will turn to follow the localizer. Here is my glide slope above me, which is good, it's what I want. I now watch to get a full diamond and have the glide slope descending, then switch on my approach. I now need to monitor my speed and flaps for a normal landing. I should now be set up for my approach and landing into Geneva runway 23 once again. I won't do a lot of talking now, I should just fly the aircraft in as normal. Just a quick recap before we make the landing. Glide slope centered, approach button on. Glide slope being followed, localizer being followed, maintain my flaps and speed, observations, auto brake set, runway now straight ahead, flaps 2. Now I just prepare for a normal landing. Flaps 3, runway now directly ahead. Now I do have a number of AI aircraft here generated by the computer. Should one of these be on the runway or flying towards me or close to me, I'm going to ignore them this time. This of course would be an ideal situation for a reason for a go-around. But in order for us to make this successful landing, I will ignore them. Full flaps. Speed reducing to around 1,000 feet above the runway. Gear down confirmed. Auto brake set. Runway directly ahead of me. All instruments centered. Follow the call-outs. Make the successful landing. 400 now.
300. Take your right position and hold. 200. 100.
First thrust. Brakes. Engines back to idle. Spoilers down. A little bit off centre line. Turn off the runway at the next exit.
1,200 meters remaining.
Welcome to Geneva. So I hope that explains it a little more clearly. It does of course require practice, practice, practice. But once again, those are the principles involved for a missed approach and go around with the route calculated by the MCDU FMC.